Hi, thanks for the introduction. Hi, I'm Peter Campbell. I'm a senior asset management consultant with Assetic, focusing on asset lifecycle modelling. My history is I studied as a coastal engineer at Griffith University on the Gold Coast, and I've been working in asset management for a little over 6 years now. Through local government and through working with Assetic, I'm actually able to work with a lot of different areas as well. So rail, power, water, everything in between. It's really a great company and a role to be in, to be able to influence so many different areas. I wanted to be here today to present to you a really great project that we undertook with Sydney Trains in developing their strategic asset management, their strategic decision making. And one of the most powerful parts of that project, which is what we'll be focusing on today, was all about the visualization of the outputs of the modelling that we did with them, and how that was really useful and quite powerful for them to be able to share with the wider executives and decision makers within their organisation. So today I'll give you a brief introduction into the project background, so what they're actually looking for, what their requirements and their expectations were, what we were able to then provide for them and how we were able to meet and even exceed their expectations. And then we'll dive into the Esri mapping because that's really what we want to see. And then I'll wrap it up for you. So Sydney Trains was implementing a new asset management system as part of their enterprise asset management project, and it was actually one of the largest implementations of SAP in the Southern Hemisphere because it's across the whole of Transport New South Wales. So this is a major project that they were implementing, and they were halfway through, almost all the way through. They'd reached a point within this project where they sort of discovered that they needed or required some asset lifecycle modelling, something that would help them with their decision making, their strategic asset management, and developing their work programs. And they were looking for something that was sort of a multivariant or a multi-decision making model that would be able to balance things like your asset condition, criticality, risk, your time and the cost of maintenance, the resources and the access and availability, actually being able to get in there and do the work on these assets that have been flagged for renewal or upgrade or some form of capital work or maintenance. The key objective was to be able to select and prioritise renewal work and maintenance work with their resourcing and budget constraints. Obviously that's something that everybody's looking to do, is not just figure out what you need to do, but also within the constraints that you actually have. They wanted to look at modelling different work program scenarios and reducing their maintenance costs by improving their renewal strategies. This would improve their strategic decision making, and that would be underpinned then by their strategic asset management plan, their asset maintenance plans, and of course their annual works programs or capital works programs. So why did Assetic get the job? We have over 15 years working in asset management, particularly in lifecycle modelling. One of our flagship software is Predictor, which is what we implemented here for them. And it's specifically designed to use some of these features that they were actually looking for, that they put in their request. We'd also actually recently done a project with Metro Trains in Melbourne, so we already had experience in that industry, and we knew that we could leverage off that. They knew we could leverage off that experience as well, and we could sort of skip some of the steps in getting to the end result. Another important factor was that Predictor integrates with almost any software, or it's a standalone piece of software, so it can actually pull data from a range of sources. So the fact that they were halfway through an implementation of SAP didn't really impact majorly on the project, because we could use the data that they had now from whichever asset management source that might be, and then once they'd gone live with SAP, they could still use the data, pulling that in from SAP instead. So that was a really key focus for them. So I'll give you a little bit of a crash course in asset management. I'm not sure how many of you are right into asset management, but I'll just take you through it quickly. This is what we call an asset lifecycle curve, or a degradation profile. It's at the heart of understanding really what asset management is all about and asset lifecycle management is all about. I'll stop talking about trains for a second, just bring it back to something we can all understand. If you could imagine a house, you'd expect to see, as an asset, you'd expect to see that degrade over a curve that may look something like this. As when it's just built, it's brand new, it's in great condition, need very little maintenance, absolutely no capital works, no major works, no renovations or anything. As it degrades, however, your maintenance starts to increase, your capital renewals start to increase, it starts to get into worse condition, and it gets into this yellow, orangey yellow sort of failure zone, and you start to get some major works required. So that's when you need to look at maybe re-roofing, re-stumping, maybe renovating your bathroom or something like that. As the assets get older, like I said, the maintenance actually increases, so you have to spend more, and even those little things, fixing the fixtures and the fittings, replacing the toilet roll holder and the handles on your kitchen door and stuff. So you notice those costs increase. So what we try and do is we try and optimize the intervention point as to where we should actually implement a capital renewal or a major maintenance. And we try and do that where it's not going to cost you too much to do it because it's too far gone, but you're not going to get, you're not going to intervene too early where it's not going to give you enough benefit for the spend that you've got there. So yes, that's what we try and do is find that intervention point. We can do that with the prioritization as well, so looking at your hierarchy, and we'll find that you might need to intervene a little earlier for your higher priority assets, so before it gets into that yellow failure zone, or maybe later if you're willing to accept the risk for some of those assets as well. Once you bring in that constraint though, like I was saying before, your resourcing and your budget constraint, once you bring in those sorts of constraints, you find that even though you've got this prioritization, you have no money to do some of the work, so you have to let some of your assets fall into the failure zone, just because we don't have the resources to cope with that. So we can look at optimizing and getting the best benefit for the network by trading off between different scenarios. Now if we had hundreds or thousands of assets even, and they all have their own degradation point or profile, they all have their own intervention point, that's when we start to really see the benefit of Predictor and doing this modelling. So with Sydney Trains, we implemented a 3-phase process, which is diagnose, construct and calibrate, and then looking at our outputs. And within these 3 phases, we've got 5 steps. The first one is to collate the data based on a generational assessment criteria and their data availability. So we go into Sydney Trains, say, okay, can you please hand over all of the data that you've got? We'll do a bit of an assessment on it, see where you're sitting, see what we can do with it, and we'll go from there. We found that Sydney Trains from a 1 to 4, 1 being really poor and 4 being really good, they're around about a 2. So they're mid to lower range on some of their assets, most of their assets. After we've done that, we go and do a model development workshop, where we actually sit down with the subject matter experts and say, all right, so this is your current data set. Tell me about your assets. How do you intervene now? What are your capital renewal plans? Why do you choose this asset over the other one? And we sort of develop how we're going to build that model for them. We then go away and try to build that model. Usually during that second phase, we discover that they use different pieces of information to what they'd actually provided us. So they use a different hierarchy system, or they have some other piece of information stored over on some other Excel spreadsheet somewhere else, and they just haven't provided it already. So we say, all right, that's great. We've identified that. If you don't collect it, that's something you probably need to do. If you do collect it, can you please give it to us? And we'll actually put that into the model. So then we're both working there. They get the extra data, and we'll start building the model for them. We then go back and calibrate the model. So we show them the output so far. What do you think? Is this kind of along the lines of where you'd expect to be? If it's not, then we can make some improvements. If it is, great, we're halfway there. And then we start to develop our suite of outputs and pull together all of the capital works programs and start to do some presentations for them so that they can understand what we've done, where we've been, where we're going, and all the work that we've put into this. So, excuse me. So this is a bit of an example of our generic suite of outputs. We do some presentations, some reports, give them this gap analysis that we've done. So what we're looking at is, where they're currently sitting, their current asset quantity, their operational criticality, the risks, the budget requirements, and the resulting service levels. This is all great information for asset managers and for engineers and for people who work in this all the time. They need the detail. However, when it comes to the decision makers, this gets a little bit too detailed for them. They're great graphs, they're great reports, but it's just a little bit too much information. So what we started doing, that's not what I want to do. Here we go. So what we decided to do was actually map the outputs. Let's get this going. Okay, so we've mapped the outputs with Esri Online. So what we've got here is, first tab, make sure you guys can see it, yes, is operational criticality. So this is something that they use to identify their priority, basically, so where their most important assets are. Oh, sorry, this is track circuits, what I've modelled here, which is a small electronic piece of equipment that actually identifies whether the train is on a track or not, and therefore stops collisions. So it's only small, but it's quite an important piece of track infrastructure. So operational criticality, we have from 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest criticality and 5 being the highest. And that's mapped for every single track circuit that they've got. So if I just zoom in here to, we're looking at, hopefully, yep, around Circular Quay, Central Station, out to Bondi Junction, you can see that these are, around 4s and 5s, a couple of 3s in there. So these are high priority assets, obviously, because they're in the CBD. They're important assets to their network. So that's our operational criticality. So we use that for prioritization. We've also got a criticality based on train count. So how many assets actually go over that track and how much and actually use that piece of infrastructure. This is another field that we use for prioritization as well. We can then look at their current condition, current overall condition. So again, I'll just zoom in a little bit so you can see. Overall, they're probably sitting around a 2.5 to a 3. We've got some really great looking assets in the green, towards some average assets in the yellow sort of zone. So this is all where they currently are. Where it's really great and we can really tell a story is where we start looking at some of these time lapses. So what we did with Sydney Trains is we actually modelled 3 scenarios. We had our option 1, which is their current financial spend, option 2, which was an increase of 50%, and then option 3, which was to maintain an average level of service or an average condition by the end of 20 years of 3, where 1 is the lowest and 1 is the highest and 5 is the lowest. So with this one, this is our current funding scenario, and we can jump through in 5-year intervals and look at how the assets actually degrade over time. Just zoom in a little bit. So you can see in the first 5-year interval, it's degraded a little bit. By year 10, it's definitely getting worse. You can see some reds popping up there. Year 15, we've got a lot of reds coming through. So we've got all these ones going out to Newcastle and Lithgow that are getting worse. And by the end of year 20, we're not looking like we're in a good state. I'll just zoom out there again. So one of the great things that we got from using this prioritization method was that we actually did maintain the condition of the assets in the CBD, which is obviously an important area for them to be looking after. However, those people out in Newcastle are going to be pretty pissed off because their trains aren't running because there's no assets there for them to run on. Option 2, so like I said, this is looking at increasing the current financial spend by 50%. So we'll just go through this one as well. 5 years on, in 10 years, definitely starting to degrade, probably not quite as quickly as option 1. 15 years, a few more reds popping up here, and then by the end of 20 years. So you can see we've got a few more green zones out here. Excuse me. A few more greens, but definitely quite a few reds still. So we're borderline. It's not really where we want to be. Now we can look at option 3, and this is maintaining an average condition of 3 by the end of 20 years. So this is the preferred option. This is what we discussed with them would be probably what we propose that they start to adopt. It's definitely an increase in funding, but you can see the benefits as a result. So starting to grade, we've got a few more greens around here, which is good. That's what we want to see. We're maintaining around that CBD still, but there's not quite so many reds popping up. So this is 15 years and then 20. So just from memory, you can already see that we've got a much better situation happening. We've definitely got a bit of a black spot here, but you know, we're maintaining our network much better. This one was a really great little tab for us to go over, and when I was actually presenting this information to the guys in Sydney Trains, it was quite funny. They're all sitting there in a room, they all whip out their phones, they go, "Oh, that's amazing, look at that one." It was really good for them to see it, side-by-side comparison, and I just love this one as well. Really shows the story. So on the left here, we've got option 1, which is their current funding, and then on the right here is option 3, which is their average of condition 3 by the end of 20 years. And so we can slide and we can see just where we're failing if we use our current, and where we can make improvements by increasing our budget. So that was really, really powerful for them to see that side by side. Also showed this option where you can just do a quick tiled view to show the different scenarios. You can also, if you zoom in on one, then the rest of them follow, which was really useful for them. We've got this side-by-side helicopter view as well. Now this one was good because it's a bit interactive, and it's always great to have a bit of interaction when you're actually looking at all this information. So here we have these cones represent the required funding, so the cumulative funding over 20 years as well for each of the track assets that we've modelled here. So the darker the colour and the larger the cone, then the more expensive that asset is. In this situation, we also actually were able to grab one of the layers for Sydney Trains network from Esri Online. So that was really great to be able to use some of that open data there. And this was great because you can zoom around, you can fly around, helicopter view, zoom in and check it out, you know, go all over the place. You get a bit dizzy actually doing that. But you can see the cumulative spend. So on the right here again, we've got option 1, current funding, and option 3, our increased funding, or our maintaining average condition of 3. And you can see that along this one, yes, we're definitely spending more money, but we can already do that comparison with our other images to say that while it's more money, we're getting more bang for our buck. And a final one here. This one's really great because you can toggle on the different layers to show a comparison between all of them. Similar to the side-by-side view, but just looking at a helicopter view instead. Again, it's a cumulative funding, and you can look at each of the 3 different options depending on which one you want to do. So Sydney Trains definitely got a lot of benefit out of this. Grant Burton, their general manager, has actually taken this information. He's presenting it to his board and the rest of the executives there. So it's been really useful information for them. It's really helped them with their strategic decision making and being able to share that story with other people who may not be completely asset minded or asset management minded. This was all really great. Another great thing with Predictor is that we actually now also integrate with Esri Online. So it's going to become even easier for us to be able to drag some information down from Esri, do some modelling, and then push it back up and do some of these story maps. So it's going to be really useful going forward to get some of this information across. Just want to jump back to, whoops, my presentation. So in case you missed anything or if you think anybody else wants to see this presentation, I am doing a live webinar on September 14th. So you can sign up. The information, you've all got your little handouts. It's going to be on that little handout that we gave you. Yeah. Any questions? Gave you too much information. You don't know where to start.
Right, if anyone does have questions. Otherwise, while we wait, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Do you have a stage 2 or a second project?
Thank you. Yes. So this was in a couple of phases, this one. So phase 1, we did a couple of models. Phase 2, we did the remainder of the models. And phase 3, we're actually looking at where we go from here. So this is great. We've got all this information, but how do we actually progress with that? And what do we do next? So it's a much more high-level strategic sort of stuff. And one of my colleagues is actually working quite closely with Sydney Trains in sort of developing what that phase is going to look like, you know, taking all of this great information that we've got. I mean, we've modelled, it was over $34 billion worth of assets in 5 months across their entire network. It's a lot of information. And particularly with the wrap-up of going live with SAP, there was so much for them to do that we're supporting them in that next phase going through into what are we going to do with this information, how are we going to sell it to our execs, and how do we use it, sort of thing. Yeah.
Excuse me, I got a question. Peter, can I check with you, when the time that you collect the data from Sydney Train to produce the model that you got, can I ask how long it takes you to complete that phase?
Yeah, so that was about 5 months all up, like completes, like go to woe. We had, the first phase was, I think it went for about 10 weeks, the first phase. Not quite that, actually. No, sorry, I'm getting a little bit confused. So maybe 8 weeks or so. And yeah, so that was our first phase. We did the first 15 models with that one. And they were the ones that had really good data on, so we knew that we could get some really great outputs with that. And they knew everything about those assets. And then we had a second phase where we modelled the last 25. And so these were the ones that they were a little less sure about. They didn't have quite as much data. So we actually assisted them by doing a couple of different modelling scenarios. So we actually provided not only the actual models, but a gap analysis as to where they could collect data going forward and how they're going to get some improvements to their data collection processes, how much that even might cost them to actually get that information, and then build up some templates for them so that when they did have the information, they could go forward and they could start building the models themselves. So yeah, so I think the first one was 8 weeks and the rest was sort of took up the rest of the 5 months. So yeah, around about 5 months all up.
Any more questions? If not, they will be outside during the break. Peter will be outside during the break for any questions. Otherwise, there is the Directions Live webinar that she will be hosting, which you can all sign up for now at the Esri Australia website.